Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Basu and Godin Notebook, the Monday, February 3rd edition of our podcast. And our opinion, we've got a lot to talk about today. The Canadiens have started their California swing, not necessarily on a good note, so we'll have plenty of thoughts on that today.
Yeah. There's something. There's no way around it.
Yeah. Before we get started, I mean, obviously, like every Monday, we will have our mailbag in the last portion of the show. I just wanted to quick correction regarding our previous podcast where we discussed Adam Boqvist and the possibility of the Canadiens putting a waiver claim on him. And I realized I made a mistake because I looked at the standings after Thursday's games, but Boqvist was put on waivers on Thursday, so you had to look. The waiver priority was based on the standings after Wednesday's game, and so that means that was before the Islanders won their Thursday's game and before the Canadiens lost theirs. So at that time, after Wednesday's games, the Canadiens had a higher winning percentage because, according to the CBA, the priority order is based on winning percentage, and so the Canadiens had a higher winning percentage than the Islanders on Wednesday. So just got mixed up because I looked at the standings from 24 hours too late. It got to an interesting debate nonetheless, but we cannot assume that the Canadiens would have passed on Boqvist because basically the Islanders had a say before they did. So there you go.
Islanders beat them to the punch. The streaking New York Islanders, who rocketed their way up the standings and watched the Canadiens go by, like on the highway when you drive by on the highway and you got the other side and it just seems like they're going like a million miles an hour because you're both driving at 120 in opposite directions.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the Islanders and the Canadiens right now. It's really what's happened in the standings, and it just goes to show how quickly things could fall apart and how slim a margin of error you have. Canadiens prior to games on Tuesday or Monday rather, or there's only one game on Monday actually, so the Canadiens are 6 points out of the playoff spot.
Yeah.
I looked it up, and when they lost that famous game in Toronto and fell to last place overall in the NHL on November 9th, I believe it was.
Yes.
They were 7 points out of the playoff spot at that time. Now, of course, 7 points back then was a bigger percentage of the total points every team had, but still, they have lost their way back into a similar spot or position at least, because they're only a point, or I guess technically 2 points out of being second to last in the conference. So it has fallen fast. And so, we need to make a little bit of sense of this, to what extent is this similar to that team that lost that game in Toronto that sort of began their run up the standings in a way, but not really. But still, that's kind of a demarcation point that we've used often this season. Do you feel this team now is similar to that team then, or are they a little different?
I think that they're different. Obviously, when you look at the win-loss record, you could say, they're reverting back to their November selves.
Well, just as a note, if they lose tomorrow night in San Jose, they will match that 6-game losing streak that they set that night on November 9th in Toronto.
Right.
It was a 6-game losing streak with an overtime loss. This would be a 6-game losing streak with an overtime loss.
I think there are some similarities and there are things that are different. The similarities are that you right now during this skid, you have a second line that is not really contributing, and that's not effective. Obviously, back then, Patrick Laine, who we are going to talk about a bit later on, was not back in action yet. And Kirby Dach was thoroughly ineffective. Right now, I find as though the Canadian second line is not contributing, so that's a similarity. I look at the play in their own end. That's a difference to me because I know that after the game in Anaheim, players were talking about defensive breakdowns, and there were, but I don't sense as though the Canadians have a systematic inability to kill the play early when the other team is getting into the zone. They don't get hemmed into their territory as often as they did back then. So the system issues that they had defensively are not of the same order. Another similarity, though, is the puck management. I find that they started to turning the puck over quite a bit in the first periods against Anaheim. I mean, it did not cost them at all, but both Laine and Matheson, in a matter of minutes, both created a turnover right in front of Samuel Montembeault. It could have been like the mothers of all A graders for the Ducks. They did not convert on those opportunities, but I mean, other than that, the Canadians played a very good first period, but you had the signs early on that puck management could be a little bit iffy. So that's something also that I find that is similar. But this is a team out now that has had the benefit of a winning streak, of understanding how it looks like when they're good, what they need to do in order to be good. And once you have that knowledge, you have the reference point has changed, and now it's going back to your winning ways, not searching what your winning ways will look like. Yeah. So that's significant in my view.
Yeah, for sure. You get it, but you do benefit from knowing that you can do it.
Yeah,
that's for sure helpful. But I look at the way they're playing now, and the similarity to me, and you touched on it with the turnovers, the puck management, but it's just the overall immaturity of the group. Like all these things that started to define them when they were in the winning run, being resilient, coming back from deficits, not changing the way they play based on the score, trusting that the way they're playing will lead to results eventually, and then having those results actually happen. Now it just seems like they're just squandering opportunities. Like their power play is completely ineffective. It doesn't create any momentum for them. In fact, it kills momentum for them more often than not. That's a similarity to back then. The power play was really struggling back then as well. But, they go up 2-0 and they're on the road. They're in California. They've lost 4 straight. You would think you would make adjustments against not a very difficult opponent, with all due respect to the Anaheim Ducks, but they're one of the worst teams in the league. You'd find a way to mature out a win, like to just kind of look at the situation in a mature fashion and don't let them back in and lock that game down. Now, a 2-goal lead is far from insurmountable, but it just, the team back then looked fragile. This team is starting to look a little fragile at times. Like it's just like so I agree with you that they have not gone back to square one. They're not back to the team that was a total mess in Toronto that night and prior to that. And talking to some of the players after that game, and Nick Suzuki talking about how he's not doing his job because he can't produce, and Marty St. Louis looking like a man who's completely exasperated, has no answers. I don't think they're there, but there's definitely a sense that this team was faced with a certain challenge, and they've had a couple of injuries. But what team doesn't have injuries? Like honestly, like they're not. Losing Caden Gooley obviously hurts, but a decent team should be able to recover from the loss of Emil Heineman and Caden Gooley.
Yeah.
It's you should be able to survive, and so they've just not risen to this challenge. Like and they saw the break as being a demarcation point. And listen, it still, if they win their next 4 games before the break, they'll probably be in pretty good shape heading into the break. But barring that, they're probably going to be like on the outer fringes of quote unquote hashtag the mix when the break hits. And that was because they've basically squandered everything they gained standings wise was basically pissed away in the last 5 games. And if they
Yeah.
don't get some of it back at least, they're kind of faced. And this is where I'm going to be interested to see how they respond, because I'm sure that someone on that team, whether it's the players, whether it's the coaching staff, whether it's Marty himself, are going to be like, we have to win out to the break, or get 3 out of 4, or create a very high bar of what they need to do from here to the break. And so we've already gotten a sense of what these guys have in their stomach. So I think now let's kind of see what they really have in their stomach, because there's a certain sense of pride has to kick in at some point. And playing the two of the worst teams in the league at a moment when your season is kind of teetering a little bit. This game in San Jose tomorrow night, I think is a pretty important one, just from a big picture. What kind of guts does this team have, sort of perspective?
Well, Marty said after the game in Anaheim, we'll have to play our best game of the season in San
Yeah.
Jose. So I think that he sees things the same way as you do. But we must not fall into the trap of thinking, looking at this team who has not won in their last 5 games, this is who they are. The same way that in the midst of their winning streak, this is not who they were either.